Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The topic of this lecture is assessing your research. Assessment is very crucial part of any human developmental initiative, and especially for the research, because all kinds of developments that have taken place in the developed countries are based on research. So assessment is something which is which does not happen occasionally. It is a process which continues, never-ending process. This lecture has been divided into these 6 points. In the beginning, introductory remarks, and then self-assessment. The main focus, of course, remains on the assessment. After the self-assessment, we have internal assessment, and then we have external assessment, and then we shall discuss some typical weaknesses, again referring back to the assessment purposes. And number 6 is publication. And after, and when we say after, actually we are again talking about the assessment. So the whole lecture, or these 6 points, revolves around a single pivotal point, and that is assessment and evaluation of research. In the introductory remarks, we come to know that evaluation is a crucial part of the research process, and the word process is very important here. We need to think about it seriously. We will come back to this, the concept of process in of assessment. Giving and receiving critical feedback is an essential part in the area of research. Focus on the assessment of thesis. In this lecture, our focus remains on the thesis, but that does not mean that we are excluding assessment of research articles or assessment of research projects that are submitted for funding, etc. Self-assessment, and it means self-assessment by the researcher. Of course, the researcher, when he or she is going to submit or present or forward his documents for research funding and etc., or anything else that is related to research. So we have this checklist. So one should take care of these points while assessing his or her research work. The language aspects, that is the correctness of the language, and I would add another word here, that is the proofreading and typographical mistakes. Accurate documentation, and this means that the referencing, citation, list of references, bibliography, etc. are accurately maintained and presented. Reader friendliness is another aspect of assessment in the checklist, that the reader is very much comfortable with the research writing and the research style and classification, etc. The research questions, are the clear aim of the research, is clarity of all the research questions and aim of the research. In the checklist, number 5 is other relevant research. How well did you as a researcher relate what you are doing to what others have done? This will of course tell the significance of your topic. Have you consulted the most relevant sources for your research? Hypothesis. So are you starting or concluding with a specific hypothesis? This question should be clear in your head first and in your writing secondly, so that the reader find it easy to understand when they are, of course, reading your research. Did you make this clear that you are actually starting your research with a hypothesis, or of course you are concluding with a specific hypothesis again? So what kind of hypothesis that you have selected? So why this hypothesis is interesting or important, and is it well justified in your writing, in your work, in your topic? The material or data, have you presented your empirical material clearly, and have you explained why you chose it, and how relevant is it to your research question material? Is your data is relevant to your research question? That is the question of relevance and the question of representativeness. And have you explained how you collected it? Of course, it is a very important aspect that you, as a researcher, you explain how did you collect that data for your research, and to what extent your data is representative as for your hypothesis or your topic is concerned. Relation between variables. So what kind of relation are you looking for? Do you think you have found some relations so you are looking for, and did you find them? Or between what variables? The making it explicit that these are the variables and these are the relation among them. Is this clear to the reader? This thing is clear. You are making it clear, the relationship between different variables. Theoretical model. So have you adopted the model at all, any kind? Or if you have done that, then why? Have you explained why you chose a particular theoretical model or approach, or a particular variant of that model? So the questions, what, why, and explaining the reasons for that. So what about other possibilities? You could have selected another theoretical model or variant of model. So what about other possibilities? So did you explain why you rejected other possibilities as for the theoretical model or any variant of the theoretical models is concerned? Central concepts and categories. So what kind of categories you have in your work, and are they adequately defined or justified against alternative concepts? Maybe your data could have been categorized in a different way. So seeing or presenting the things in a way that also tells us the other possibilities or other categorizations. So I'm giving the justification for your own categorization. What kind of classification did you adopt, and have you been explicit enough in presenting these all these things? Counter evidence. Have you considered any counter evidence in your research? So have you dealt with borderline cases adequately? Because in counter evidence, there are always borderlines, or we can say gray area. So are you aware of those borderlines or gray areas, and you are you are telling this to your reader? So have you dealt with counter arguments as well and alternative explanations, or no? Reliability is another important aspect as for the self-assessment is concerned. Is the analysis reliable? So if the analysis has been carried out taking all the relevant aspects into account, so is that reliable, explicit enough to be replicable? Of course. Are the conclusions accurate, classifications consistent, statistics appropriate? There are different ways of checking the reliability of the analysis. So calculations is one aspect, classification is another, consistency is the third one, and statistics, if you are using statistics in your research, statistics, the appropriateness of the statistics, etc. Validity, are the conclusions valid, on hypothesis supported or not, that you actually adopted in the beginning? So your hypothesis is supported or it is not supported out of your research. Adequate evidence is logical argument. Is the evidence relevant to the original research problem? Again, the question of relevancy here. Do the conclusions link up with the introduction and the stated aim? So we feel, and you also feel with me, I'm sure, that here everything is connected to everything in your research, right? From the research questions and hypotheses and the literature review, and of course the analysis, and then conclusions, and so on. The follow-up, the question of follow-up actually is the question what next, that is related to your recommendations for further research. And did you make some suggestions in this regard? And the last one is, as for the checklist of self-assessment is concerned, is implications. So what? So what are the implications of your research? So have you considered these implications in the conclusion, and have you explained these implications somewhere and most appropriately in the conclusion? With this, we can come to the third point of this lecture is internal assessment, and we have key questions here. So internal assessment is usually done by your supervisor, your teachers, or your I mean research fellows that you are working with you, or working in the department or in the university in the area that is related to you. So the key questions that should be kept in as for the internal assessment is concerned, or are you really kept? Are the readers convinced or impressed? This aspect is of course made a criteria for assessment. So you seem trustworthy. So are you, for the readers, you look trustworthy to the readers? Are you careful or honest or thorough or objective? And facts and calculations are correct, and sources are correctly acknowledged, and quotations are accurate. So these are the key questions. Some other key questions are related to the evidence that logically supports your claim. So provision of evidence in your research. Did you do that? And the examples are relevant and representative, of course, representative, relevant to your topic, your classifications, to your research questions, to your hypothesis. Arguments are rigorous. I mean, they are sufficient enough that can prove your, for or against point. Concepts and claims are explicit. I mean, they are very clear, the concepts and claims, and clarity in writing, and a reader friendly style. So you communicate well to your reader, and something important or interesting and valuable that you are drawing from your research. That is the question of implications that we have indicated to in the previous section. We have a criteria. This is a criteria that can be kept, in view for any kind of assessment. Maybe that can also be used for the self-assessment, and also if some research is handed over to you for the assessment, and this criteria can be used, can be expanded, modified, and adapted according to the individual needs. So, but this is the points are very basic and fundamental that needs to be considered while assessing research work. So definition of the problem, so basic hypothesis again, aims, awareness and critical representation of other relevant research, choice and justification of theoretical framework, presentation and justification of methodology, presentation and justification of data, and analysis and discussion of results, use of evidence, logic, validity of conclusions, self-critical awareness of the work, strength and weaknesses, overall structure, stylistic aspects, academic conventions, clarity, originality, wider implications, and significance. So you see in the previous section, that was the self-assessment. Here in internal assessment, we are almost repeating the same aspects one way or the other for assessing any research. Again here, even in this section, that is number 4, external assessment, although we have here different kind of criteria, but we will feel that the basic crucial points remain almost similar in any kind of research assessment. I'm sorry. So by whom this external assessment is done is by the peer review committee for any research journals, or publishers, or funding agency. So the criteria that is important to take note The journals or publishers or funding agencies. Guidelines. Usually the journals and the publishers and the funding agencies, they explicitly provide guidelines for let's say the quality check or assessment. So criteria are extremely important and they provide it usually, and check whether your contribution meets the particular criteria. Is the documentation required complete? Again, we are coming back to the question of documentation here. So it's a similar aspect. And applications, funding agency are complete, because for the sake of submitting your research project for to a funding agency, of course you need to make sure that your application for funding is complete in its all aspects. So submitted on time. So submission of the application on time is another very important requirement. I'm saying this here because not everything is relevant to every society or every environment. All these things are very much relevant to the societies and environments where research has top priority and research is taken seriously. But in societies and environments where research has low priority and is not based on further development or future development, of course, some of these, let's say, things are not relevant. I have to say that that doesn't mean that we should, I mean, overlook them or we should not take them seriously, but the concept should be very much clear. Point number 5 in this lecture is typical weaknesses, and here we have 8 typical weaknesses discussed: length, organization, review of the literature, methodology, logic, style, added value, and plagiarism. So let's take these typical weaknesses one by one. So the length. Length is very important, and length is determined by the topic of your research and by the classification, etc. So sometimes what happens is the topic or structure is too wide, not restricted properly. So from the very inception from the very inception, when the idea of any research was conceived, this aspect was ignored and it was overlooked, and the result is this, that the topic is wide or the structure is wide and it's not restricted properly. So irrelevance introductory sections are included, that of course contribute in enhancing the number of pages, but not of course relevant, and they look very ugly in the arena of research. So starting too far away from their actual topic, especially in introduction. So if your topic requires a sizable introduction of 5 pages, and you are writing 40 pages of the total 100 pages of your thesis, and the 40 pages belong to introductory sections, that means you are actually making your work a combination of irrelevant things, in one book. So irrelevant theoretical background, that also affects badly the length. Information merely for the sake of information, again related to the length. Unnecessary repetition, again create problem as for the length is concerned. So your work, let's say, requires only 50 pages, but you are doing all these mistakes, and in this way your work has become of 200 pages. So that means the your work is full of many things that were not necessary. So banalities and wasting time and space by saying unimportant, irrelevant things, that also add up to the number of pages in your work, and they are not significant, they are not relevant, they are not needed, and hence of course rejected. Organization is another typical weakness in research work, and one has to be watchful about this weakness as well. Unclear, illogical organization. Organization should be illogical, should be based on some criterion. Sections, not fit together into a coherent whole. No real logical connections are there between the sections. inappropriate titles are given, and odd relation between title and its sections. Review of the literature is another weakness that is reflected yearly, and one should try to avoid it. Writer neglects some major relevant sources while reviewing the literature in the area. Neglects major relevant sources. Very important. Writers is uncritical. Maybe he has included all the relevant major resources, but he is uncritical of the sources used. He's not expressing his opinion or doing some kind of analysis of these resources. Or the author or the researcher relies very heavily on one or two sources only in the preparation of the review of the literature or literature review, giving a biased picture of what others have done. Another, of course, typical weakness is reflected in methodology. So lack of explicitness. So methodology has not been the explained explicitly, or the topic not has been explained explicitly, or the questions, the aim is too vague, it's too general, that cannot be put in a scientific manner. So crucial terms are not explicitly defined. Terms have not been defined clearly. Necessary information about the material have not been provided. Method of analysis missing, and lack of evidence. Conclusions are not justified by the analysis. No relevance or no relation between the analysis and the emerging conclusion. Not enough data to support the generalization, or lack of critical attitude. All these are the weaknesses. Other studies just listed but not evaluated. Of course, the methods are described but no critical comment is made. Scholars poor references are adopted and copied with no critical reaction. Scholars poor inferences, sorry, not references, inferences are adopted and they are copied with no critical analysis. In any kind of research, whether you are talking about other sources, your work, or whatever, critical analysis is, let's say, the consistent part of your writing, should be consistent part of your writing. The other weaknesses, as for the methodology is concerned, is the lack of statistics, or lack of appropriate theory, lack of criteria for data selection, no possible practical or theoretical implications of the work. As for the logic is concerned, a typical weakness is the concept or terms are vague. So even the researcher himself or herself is not clear about or the terms or the concept used in his or her research. So, or they are slippery, or used in more than one sense, or they are used in an ambiguous way, or they are not defined properly. Vague classification. So all these weaknesses are related to the logic. So classifications are not very much clear, or at least logical. So lack of criteria for categories. So categorization is not based on any working criterion, or circular arguments, where the arguments are presented, or actually analyzed, done an argument, are presented in a way which are creating confusion rather than clarity. Or fallacious arguments are, they are arguments based on wrong premises and wrong conclusions. A general conclusion is drawn from a particular textual passage. This is again related to the logic. So it's a particular passage is studied, but it is generalized without any logical evidence, with any logical reason. Or confusion of correlation and cause. So the researcher is not clear about what is the difference between correlation and the cause. As for the style is concerned, the lack of signposts in your writing, the reader is unable to shift or to transfer from transition from one section to the other, and of course know the sequencing, or knows the relation. So there are no signposts for in the writing. Too much verbosity, too long or complicated sentences. So if your research work is full of I mean verbatim quotes, so or too long complicated sentences, these weaknesses are related to style. Too many parentheses and subclauses are used, poor punctuation, too much direct quotation, that is not advisable, too many or too few, not representative examples. So either the examples are too much or too little, and then they are not representative as for the data or the classification is concerned. So no personal touch, that personal opinion, analysis, critical analysis. Okay, the other, typical weaknesses are related to added value. Added value basically are related to the implications and, the what you have achieved in your research. So if your research does not reflect any new information, and all these points are related to a PhD level. Usually they are not considered at MS level. So the level is very important. Level of research or degree is very important as for the relevance of these points. So you are not adding new information, no new data, or new way of looking at question and answer, no new concepts, no new methods are used, or no new evidence, etc. So right from the data to the conclusions, in between, your work is combination of others' work and reordered in your work. The other work has been have been collected by you and reordered in your work. Plagiarism is very important issue in the area of research. So plagiarism is a serious matter, so with serious consequences, maybe even the end of an academic career. So end of an academic career, once again, this is it really means end of academic career in societies, in environments where research has a top priority, or research is used for the actual development. So we can say the developed countries. But as for the societies and environments whose priorities are different, and research has no place in their top priorities, so of course I think this is irrelevant practically. But I tell you, theoretically this is very important, or principally this is very important aspect, plagiarism. So, what is the meaning of plagiarism? Literally, it means kidnapping or stealing some others' belongings, etc. And taking ideas here in the field of research means ideas or passages from other authors without acknowledging properly. So, the brief concept of plagiarism is this one in the area of research: taking ideas or passages from other authors without acknowledging properly. So, using this is also another aspect of plagiarism, using exactly the words of others, so, and giving source is given, but failing to indicate that you are indeed quoting. This is very important, because when you are taking some ideas, information, or some analysis from a source, you should give to the reference in a very clear way that this path is taken from this or that source. So it is always better either to quote properly with quotation marks or indentation, as we have discussed earlier in one of our previous lectures, or paraphrase and report freely. So either the verbatim quotation should be taken, or in the shape of quote unquotes, or indentation more than 3 lines, and or take the ideas and other things from some source and paraphrase them, and then report freely with mentioning the source. With this, we come to the last point of this lecture, that is publication and after, and we have suggestions here. So, good MA thesis might be turned into an article for publication. In my personal view, it can, two research articles can be extracted from one MA thesis or MS thesis as per our system in universities. So getting your work published is certainly one sign of its quality. If you get your work published in an accredited and in a established and this good journal, reputed journal, that means your research, you have produced a quality research. But the process of research or assessment does not stop here. That is very important. I think in the beginning I was trying to emphasize on that. That is the process. So the process of research or assessment basically does not stop here. Also here we see that the research and assessment both are used synonymously. They are indicating to one aspect. So there is previous research, either it is assessed again, evaluated again, and new research is done that, and yet again the new research is assessed and evaluated, and the process is continuous, does not stop. So, if your work catches the attention of other scholars in your field, so it may be again see reviewed, cited, or criticized. So all these are different kinds of assessment or evaluation. So you will learn a lot from these things. From reviews, from citations, and from criticism by other researchers. So you yourself may develop your ideas or refine argument analysis or new points of view through the others' contribution in different shapes. So basically, research is a journey and with no end point. And I would finish my lecture with this, the aspect of key aspect in the area of research, and that is assessment and evaluation. Without any evaluation or good assessment, which is a process, continuous process, no society, no environment can produce a reliable, a valid research that may lead towards the solid, sustainable development. Take very good care of yourself, dear students. Assalamu alaikum.